Bonjour, bienvenue tout le monde. Je vais commencer. Il va sûrement y avoir d'autres personnes qui vont se joindre à nous. So to overcome our collective soup coma after lunch, we have a wonderful panel for you with perspectives from different countries and from different sectors on the implementation of artificial intelligence and specifically how trade unions, so we have 3 practitioners, and then we have Abby, who will come and try to sum it all up for us and maybe create some connections between the different presentations. So we have 4 presentations on this topic from different sectors, different countries. If you need the translation, there will be at least 1 presentation in French. There's instructions on how to get it. Please do. Nos traducteurs et traductrices travaillent très fort, donc on vous remercie de suivre les présentations dans les différentes langues. All right, as people continue to trickle in, I will start by maybe letting you know what questions we asked our presenters, because they will all tackle similar questions in their presentations. So we asked our presenters, what form does artificial intelligence take in your sector of activity? And is it a real implementation or is it just rhetoric? In other words, are we actually talking about artificial intelligence or algorithmic management, data analysis, and that sort of stuff, which isn't quite the same thing, obviously. The second question we asked was, what union actions are you taking in the context of real or planned implementation of AI? And does this include mostly collective bargaining initiatives? Or are we doing are we going into political action, political requests? Are we pursuing legal strategies, and so on and so forth? Second question. Third question, what are the limits and challenges of union action with regards to AI? And if you had a magic wand, what would you have changed in order to allow your organization to properly tackle issues of artificial intelligence? And our first presenter is coming to us from 6 hours away, from Frankfurt, I presume, IG Metall headquarters, Vanessa Barth, who's a member of the Supervisory Board of IG Metall, which is the largest private sector trade union in Germany, unless I am mistaken, and mostly, of course, originally in the metal sector, but also beyond the metal sector. So Vanessa has prepared some slides for us. So if I could ask our technical support to stop sharing from our end, then she can go ahead.
So my name is Vanessa Barth. I'm the policy director of IG Metall, and I have many years of experience with consulting and trying to support Works Council members who try to create a good framework for the use of AI in their companies. And also we try, to make lobbying in the political field for good regulation for AI. So it's really, I would say, today, AI is like a really hot topic in Germany since many, many years, but many years you didn't find really applications in the companies. Everybody was talking about it, but you didn't see any practical thing. But since a year or two, that has changed dramatically. So you could say that in every part of the companies, you will find people who try to use AI tools, like and really in the production, in marketing, even in compliance sectors, trying to make a better compliance, and HR. It's really like an avalanche, and it's difficult for our people to create good regulations for the companies because it's so many products that are pushing into the companies, and they're trying to get control and they're trying to understand it. And so we're really in a very tough situation. And I was asked to share examples where you find AI in the companies, and on the other hand, the legal framework that exists and which parts of the legal frameworks we think is useful and what we would, think that it would be good to have. Now I'm starting it. We see a lot of opportunities and we see a lot of risks. And the idea is, as IG Metall, to minimize the risks and to realize the opportunities. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but on top of the risk, of course, is job loss. And job security is also on part of the chances. So it's really, and the experience is that whether the chances get a chance, right, or the risks threaten the employees is actually a question of how you shape it in the companies. I've seen examples in, if you think about controlling, for example, I've seen examples in a large IT company, payroll accounting, where accounting has been transformed by the use of AI. And before the using of AI, you had a high proportion of repetitive activities, like you had to make a manual transfer of data from one system from the other, a lot of manual checking. I mean, we all know examples of such annoying activities. And afterwards, after the implementation of AI, of chatbots and RPAs, then part of the activities were replaced. About 40% of the personal capacity was gone, was not needed anymore. Those colleagues were placed in other areas, but the remaining colleagues became more responsible tasks. So data analysis, the training and further development of the bots, agile working models, self-organized teamwork, reduction of a management level. So it all turned out well. But in the same company, other department, you would have a example where it goes in the completely other direction. And it all depends on the shop floor. Do the people understand the technology? Do they very early try to understand what could happen and what the chances are and what the risks are? And if you have a good support in this situation, you know, it's going to end well. And if people don't look very much into it, you know, the risks are very high. And generally, the idea is you find here examples, right, that are actually in our companies. And generally, people say that it takes quite some time until AI or information tools really start to be used productively, because you need the organizational layer, you need the qualification, and usually people say it takes time, you know, if you implement AI until it really starts to pay off and until you see the effects. And a lot in the research and in the literature, a lot of people say this. And I don't know if anybody of you works with teams in the company or whatever, in university or wherever your workplace is. And Teams is a very good example, because in most cases it is introduced without any basic rules, and the effect is total chaos. So I can well remember how I was suddenly, after the implementation of Teams in IG Metall, included in hundreds of chats. And I was assigned tasks and given deadlines by half of IG Metall, and half of it I didn't even realize, because there was not, I mean, the organization was not adapted to the system. Yeah. And there were training opportunities, but I didn't have time. So a tool was introduced, but nobody thought about what it meant for the work organization. And then you somehow have to find your way around and organize yourself. And the experience with AI tools is very, very similar. So it's more about technology. And as I said, most experts agree that it will take a while before the systems can be used productively. But I brought you a different example. Here you see Content Day and Text Brokers. It's two texting platforms. It's platform work. They're so-called crowdworking platforms. They create tasks from a search engine optimization for online stores until like book contributions, articles, books, whole books, you know. And these were very, very well doing platforms. And 6 weeks after the introduction of ChatGPT, or after ChatGPT 3 was launched, they had lost over half of their turnover. ChatGPT swept away their business model in a matter of weeks, and it hasn't come back to this day. New copywriters can no longer register because there's no longer enough work. And some of the permanently employed crowd, the content, the community managers have lost their jobs. I mean, it was really literally within weeks. So that's a contradiction, because I say, okay, usually it takes time, but in many cases, it's really quick. And apart from the economic slump, they had the additional problem because the copywriters were also using ChatGPT at the time to create the text. So suddenly they had to deal with the question of how to identify AI-generated text, because their customers were ordering texts written by humans. So this is an example for where it didn't take anybody long to start using AI productively. And this is my theory is that if there's no protection, this is what happens. So we have to try to get a more controlled environment for the implementation of AI. So here's a list also what is at stake for companies. I'm not going to go through all the lists. You can read it. I'll provide the slides after the session. And here's an example for Siemens Healthineers. I'm on the supervisory board for Siemens Healthineers. And then now we are on the chancellor side. This is about product innovation and process innovation. And I will say something to the example on the right side. You have on the right side, you have a so-called patient couch. I don't know how it's called in Canada, but most of us have probably lain on one of these, usually in a horizontal position, straight position. And these couches are for radiotherapy, and they're developed and manufactured in a town in Bavaria, in Germany. And the requirement for these couches is a maximum of mobility in all directions and all positions. They should take as many positions as possible with light people and also with more heavy people. And why? Because the radiation has to be targeted very precisely and hit as little neighboring tissue as possible. And these couches are really high tech, and now they are developed with the help of digital twins and AI. And the result is that these developed, usually if you design such a machine, right, you have to build a couple of prototypes, because you have to see, is this position possible? How does it, can you reach to that point? And by using digital twins and for modeling AI models, they said that instead of 5 prototypes, they only need 1. So they have to build only 1 example before they can say, okay, now we find all the mistakes and now we can create the final product. That it saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of money, and of course the cancer patients get better devices faster. But also they need less people to build the prototypes. So you see, it has always a good impact and also the risks. And the next example is and I wanted to show, because it shows also how many people are so careless about this topic. We have a lot of AE applications when it comes to a selection of people, application processes, even in human resources development, the selection of people who come into management programs to get qualifications. And here's an example that maybe you might also know. This woman here is Ingrid Hoffmann. She is the CEO of the temporary employment agency Hoffman Personal, and she was in a talk show, and she introduced in a talk show this an AI chatbot, Jamie. This chatbot does the first initial interviews for temporary workers because she says, look, we have situations where we need within a month we need 1,000 workers for a plant or 500 workers for a plant, and we have to organize the process better. So this chatbot, in a response, like you write an application, it responds within 5 minutes. And it matches the requirements profile with the applicant profile and profile. And Ingrid Hoffman says, "Oh, the process is completely neutral. You can really rely on the
Vanessa,
process."
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Okay, then can you try to wrap it up in a minute or two? I've been trying to find a microphone to actually signal that the time is coming to an end. So if you can.
It's the last bit. So
All
she
right,
said,
thank you.
yeah, okay. So this woman says, we have 5 minutes. Now I got confused. Sorry. So what she's saying is use it for things that are boring, but for the people who apply for jobs, it's not boring at all. And in Germany, we have a very special set of rules, a very special situation. We have works council members, and they have very profound possibilities to take influence on how this is implemented in the companies. And it's one of our superpowers is this, the Works Constitution Act. And it is a very old regulation that says when a new technical tool is implemented, the Works Council has a say in if the tool is if the tool can be used to monitor the behavior or the performance or control the behavior or the performance of the employees, then the Works Council can say to the employer, we have to get an agreement on how this tool is going to be implemented. And this is actually our strongest tool. We have become a lot of new regulation. You can look it up afterwards, the GDPR, the AI Act, but this is really the Works Constitution Act is for us the most important tool. And whoever tries to get a regulation, the most important tip is don't use definitions that are too narrow. Try to define AI very broadly. Thank you very much.
Donc, notre prochaine présentatrice qui va nous parler provient du syndicat canadien de la fonction publique. Nathalie, donc la parole est à toi, conseillère syndicale au service de la recherche. On manque de temps, donc voilà. Mais tu as quand même ton temps.
Merci. Alors, je suis conseillère syndicale au service de la recherche au SCFP. Le SCFP, pour ceux qui ne le connaissent pas, c'est le plus grand syndicat au Canada, plus de 750 000 membres. La très grande majorité des membres sont dans le secteur public, comme l'indique le nom du syndicat, mais nous représentons aussi des gens dans le secteur privé, donc dans le secteur public, des gens dans l'éducation, dans la santé, dans les sociétés d'État, dans les bibliothèques, les services de garde, en fait, dans l'éducation, des services de garde jusqu'à l'université. Et dans le secteur privé, on représente des gens dans le transport privé, transport de valeur, transport aérien, les ports, les médias et les télécommunications. Merci. Et donc, pour ce qui est de l'implantation de l'IA en milieu de travail au SCFP, bien, on commence à la voir, je dirais, dans les 12 derniers mois, on a de plus en plus de cas qui surgissent. Donc, d'abord, ça a été des cas de gestion algorithmique pour toutes les questions de discipline ou d'assiduité au travail. Ensuite, on a vu des robots conversationnels apparaître dans les villes, par exemple, pour répondre aux questions des citoyens. Et le secteur qui est le plus impacté présentement par l'IA, c'est vraiment le secteur du sous-titrage pour malentendants, où on a même perdu dans les derniers mois là, 2 départements de sous-titrage avec des stratégies différentes des employeurs. Et dans tous ces cas-là, on n'a pas été avisé à l'avance. Donc, tout a été préparé en amont. On a même une membre qui a été utilisée par l'employeur pour entraîner le système d'IA qui allait remplacer tout son département. On a également du travail de bureau qui est assisté par l'IA. Il y a un employeur dernièrement qui nous a avisé qu'il allait encourager tous ceux qui utilisent la suite Office, dans le fond, à utiliser Copilot, soit pour le web ou pour la suite Office. Donc, c'est sûr que ça va mettre les gens en compétition les uns avec les autres. Hein? Il y aura pas on nous dit pas de compression de personnel pour l'instant, mais ceux qui vont apprendre à utiliser le système vont forcément avoir une longueur d'avance sur les autres quand il y aura des changements dans l'organisation du travail. Et on voit aussi dans les villes l'automatisation des inspections de la chaussée, par exemple. La ville de Laval a fait une annonce la semaine dernière à ce sujet-là. Et ils ont aussi avisé que dorénavant, toute la comptabilité, en fait, pas la comptabilité, mais la gestion de la facturation serait faite par une IA. Et dans ce cas-là aussi, les syndicats n'ont pas été avisés à l'avance. Donc, c'est malheureusement un modus operandi qu'on voit de plus en plus. En fait, on voit depuis le début. Et Statistique Canada nous démontre que, par ses estimations expérimentales de l'exposition professionnelle potentielle à l'IA, qu'il y a vraiment un risque de remplacement des tâches ou des emplois par l'IA. Donc, ce que vous voyez sur le tableau, à droite, ce sont les 60% de travailleuses et travailleurs qui occupent des postes qui sont fortement exposés à l'IA. Dans le cadran supérieur, vous avez ceux qui ont des emplois qui sont complémentaires avec l'IA, donc, par exemple, les médecins de famille qui vont pouvoir utiliser l'IA pour augmenter leur travail, le faciliter, leur permettre d'aller plus loin, de travailler plus rapidement, par exemple, s'ils ont la formation, bien évidemment. Et dans le cadran du bas, vous avez toute une autre catégorie d'emplois, donc à peu près 31% des emplois au Canada qui sont fortement exposés à l'IA et peu complémentaires. Donc, ce sont des emplois qui peuvent être remplacés complètement ou partiellement par l'IA. Et ça pourrait amener donc des disparitions de postes ou des recombinaisons de postes et également des modifications corrélatives au niveau des salaires. Alors, on ne connaît pas exactement la trajectoire que va prendre l'IA, mais on sait qu'elle va avoir un impact sur une partie des travailleurs qu'on représente. Maintenant, il reste à savoir combien. Donc, devant ces estimations, comme il n'y a pas de législation au Canada qui encadre directement les relations de travail quant à l'introduction de systèmes d'intelligence artificielle, notre principal champ d'action, nous, à l'heure actuelle, c'est vraiment d'informer les membres. Donc, on veut qu'ils soient capables de faire face à l'IA en entreprise et donc améliorer leur littératie. Et oui, la littératie des membres par rapport à l'IA, mais aussi par rapport à tout le numérique. Parce que ce n'est pas uniquement, souvent il y a des combinaisons, hein. L'IA ne viendra pas seule, elle va venir avec un autre service numérique. On pourrait en nommer plusieurs, mais je pense qu'on n'a pas le temps. Et donc, cet été, on a publié un guide pour justement informer nos membres de comment ça fonctionne l'IA. Donc, c'est vraiment un guide de vulgarisation qui explique comment ça marche, mais aussi qu'il y a différentes sortes d'IA qui sont plus ou moins autonomes, plus ou moins précises, que l'IA générative peut produire du contenu sous différentes formes, que c'est aussi des systèmes qui peuvent produire des erreurs et entraîner différents risques en milieu de travail. Donc, tout ça part de la base que l'IA et le numérique, ce sont des technologies qui peuvent être implantées et passer assez inaperçues. Et on parle également donc des risques des systèmes de gestion algorithmique. Vous envoyez une série à l'écran, donc les objectifs de rendement déraisonnable, le manque de transparence, des atteintes possibles à la vie privée. Et on a aussi travaillé à un guide sur la négociation de l'IA pour outiller nos membres sur la façon de protéger leurs droits. Et ce guide-là va être publié d'ici la fin de l'année. Et donc, je le répète, il n'y a pas de législation du travail au Canada qui oblige les employeurs à déclarer l'utilisation de l'IA en entreprise. Donc, on s'est dit, voyant la lenteur là, de tous les processus législatifs en cours, en fait, il y en a un principal, c'est 27 au fédéral présentement. Donc, comme c'est très lent, on s'est dit, on va miser sur notre pouvoir de négociation. Donc, c'est un outil qui va nous permettre, la convention collective, d'encadrer l'utilisation de ces systèmes pour protéger nos membres et avoir un mot à dire sur les bouleversements dans le milieu de travail. Et on parle du principe qu'il n'y a pas de clause unique, universelle pour cerner les risques de l'IA. Donc, c'est une approche globale qui vise à négocier différentes dispositions sur la technologie qui vont travailler ensemble pour offrir une meilleure protection. Donc, certaines des clauses qu'on présente sont des nouvelles clauses, donc sur la transparence et le droit à l'information, par exemple, sur l'établissement d'un comité technologique pour ouvrir le dialogue avec l'employeur, parce que présentement, on ne le sait pas, quand l'IA est introduite en entreprise, on est confronté au fait que, oh, OK, c'est demain, puis là, il faut réagir. Donc, nous, on aimerait avoir un dialogue pour pouvoir régler les problèmes en amont, prévenir, prévoir la formation, entre autres, puis éviter qu'il y ait des répercussions négatives sur la charge de travail ou la rapidité à laquelle on fait le travail. On veut également qu'il y ait des clauses sur un petit peu des études d'impact qui soient faites sur les outils qui sont utilisés par les employeurs. Il y a une obligation de faire ces évaluations d'impact-là pour éliminer la partialité, la discrimination, éliminer des problèmes en santé et sécurité également. Et on veut également limiter les systèmes à haut risque et la surveillance qui peut être accrue avec les systèmes d'IA pour protéger la vie privée au travail. Dans le guide, il y a des clauses aussi à bonifier face à l'intelligence artificielle, les changements technologiques notamment. On a regardé la jurisprudence pour voir de quelle façon on pouvait justement élargir la clause pour éviter que l'IA passe à côté des dispositions de changement technologique. Donc, on a ajouté une notion de technologie ou système numérique aux équipements et matériels qui sont généralement mentionnés dans ces clauses-là. Et on a aussi spécifié que ça peut s'appliquer à un ou plusieurs employés et non seulement pour des licenciements massifs. Je vais vous faire rapidement des remerciements à deux groupes qui nous ont beaucoup inspirés pour la création de ces deux guides. Donc, les gens de l'International des services publics qui ont créé un portail de négociation sur la numérisation qui est fort utile et qui donne des exemples de partout dans le monde. Et également l'OBIA avec l'axe de travail pour lequel travaille Christian. Je vois plein de monde ici, Vincent. J'ai vu Julie tout à l'heure. Donc, merci à tout le monde. C'est le guide sur la gestion algorithmique qui nous a également beaucoup inspirés. Pour ce qui est des défis, bon, nous, si on avait une baguette magique, on voudrait influencer positivement les politiques publiques, non seulement pour les travailleurs, mais aussi pour la société, avoir plus de transparence des employeurs, qu'on soit au courant de ce qui est implanté, qu'il y ait des obligations de formation et de requalification, l'interdiction de systèmes d'IA dont les risques sont inacceptables, comme des systèmes de manipulation du comportement, reconnaissance des émotions, etc. Et voilà, ça complète le point de vue que j'avais à vous donner.
Merci beaucoup, Nathalie. We'll switch back into English and we'll switch back to our online virtual participation. Alistair Hepburn is with ACTRA in Toronto. And so from what we heard, just leave our colleagues a little bit of time to prepare everything here. So what we've heard from the content creators in Germany, that didn't work out very well for them. So obviously very interested to hear what ACTRA in Toronto has prepared as a strategy. Alistair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As Raoul said, my name is Alistair Hepburn. I'm the executive director of ACTRA Toronto. ACTRA is the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists. And we represent across the country 28,000 performers that you see on film, television, video games, audiobooks, all of those fun things. In answering the three questions, when I looked at the three questions that I was sent, what form does artificial intelligence take in our sector? You've probably already all seen it or heard it. Generative AI is a major concern for the film and television industry. Voice performers, on-camera performers, they've already started to be replaced by digital replicas. And quite honestly, most audiences think it's pretty cool. If you've watched any of the new Star Wars films, you saw Mark Hamill be de-aged. You've seen Harrison Ford be de-aged. Basically every single Marvel movie that is out has used some form of generative AI. And right now, by 2026, there's an expectation that the industry in Canada will lose at least 10,000 full-time jobs due to the use of AI and generative AI. It is very, very real in film and television. In terms of the actions that this union is taking, and again, we are autonomous branches based across the country, mine being based out of Toronto, but we represent all of Ontario except Ottawa, and I represent 15,000 individuals, performers. But as a union nationwide, we go into our collective agreement bargaining on November 4th. We will actually be in Montreal to do that. You may have heard or have some sort of recollection that last summer, SAG-AFTRA, which is the union south of the border in the US, the folks that represent Tom Cruise and all the big celebrities, they had a strike, and that strike was over AI. And we are about to face the exact same challenge with the same producers that they went on strike against. Plus, we will then add Canadian producers to that mix. But we can't do it alone. So we are also lobbying the government to ensure AI and deepfake protections are in place. And even though Canada was one of the first to talk about AI and AI protections, we are going to be likely one of the last to implement them. It is a rather unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. The other question was, what are the limits and challenges of the union action in the field of AI and my magic wand? And really, it is about the public, and it is about the public willingness to help fight to keep humans as part of the art form and not hand it over to digital replicas. My magic wand would want to ensure that there was digital watermarking in place. So anything that is captured, any image that is captured, any voice that is captured, any likeness that is captured has some sort of digital watermark so that it can be traced. Right now, we have a pseudo protection in Canada called nil rights, name, image, likeness. Well, we'd like to expand that. We would like to add voice to that, because right now your voice cannot be copyrighted in any way, shape, or form. The words you say, the words you sing can be, but the voice itself cannot be. So that intense biometric data that you own cannot be copyrighted in any way. So we'd like to change those nil rights to, we're calling them vinyl, V-I-N-L. So voice, image, name, and likeness. Really, how it plays out, and I'll try to be brief on this. Some of the main ways that the frameworks are going to play out for us are definitely union-led pushbacks and protections. Again, SAG-AFTRA went on strike last summer. The Writers Guild of America went on strike last summer to stop AI's ability to rewrite a script, all those lovely scripts that we depend on to watch movies, to watch TV shows. It boils down to us to three main things. Consent, so informed consent, so that an individual actually knows what it is their image, voice, persona, likeness is being used for. Compensation, that they are fairly paid for the use of capturing that and any additional reuse. any reuse whatsoever, even if they only use your right arm or they use your eyeball as part of a new digital replica, you would be compensated for that. And then control. And control is about the security of this digital data, ensuring that it can't be used somewhere else illegally, ensuring that it can't be scraped and used to train further AI. So we really have boiled it down to the 3 C's: consent, compensation, and control. We also need there to be producer and studio interest in those protections, because they have a lot of interest in AI. You know, if it is going to be cheaper for them to do this, that is the road that they will follow for sure. But we also need to ensure that if they do that, that they don't have any copyright protections over that work, that there is no copyright of any sort of digital replica that they introduce, which would therefore make them not want to introduce it, because then someone can steal it from them, much like they would be doing. So it really is, we protect them, they protect us, to ensure that it works. The industry pressure last summer from SAG-AFTRA and the upcoming pressure from ACTRA will result and has resulted in some real potential public relations fallout. A lot of studios have aggressively avoided implementing it in any way, shape, or form, because they see it as publicly, what they're saying is they see it as a tool to assist, not replace. And we're good with that. We are happy with that. So we want those reassurances to continue. But despite those, the specifics of the generative AI implementation remains vague, which leaves room for interpretation in future disputes. We also, of course, have legal and ethical considerations, the lack of established legal frameworks in Canada. Even with the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act chugging along, it is not chugging along at a pace that is going to keep up with the technology that it is trying to legislate. So we need that to happen. Really, the ethical issues in terms of bias that is inherent in artificial intelligence. We see a lot of marginalized communities, those that are already equity seeking, get further behind when it comes to the use of AI, because their image is not part of any sort of consideration when AI starts to generate images. Again, as I briefly touched on, the technology is definitely outpacing the policy. We are seeing some good work being done in the EU on this, maybe not in all locations, but France has some good stuff in place. We're seeing some amazing work come out of California at the moment. Governor Newsom in California has really thrown his weight behind this. And in Tennessee, they progressively came out with something called the Elvis Act, which actually secures and ensures that voice, and they were really focusing on country singers, but ensuring that those voices could be protected and not used without consent. And really, as I started with, it all boils down to the public and what that pressure from the public actually looks like. If the public embrace AI in my industry, film and television, then we are already starting from a losing position. So it's to ensure that the public understands what that looks like, what it means when they embrace AI. And then we remind our local governments that AI doesn't pay taxes. That is a big one for us. And if there is no tax money coming in, then a lot of the programs that they have in place will no longer exist. And it will be very hard to get reelected when you don't get votes. So really, those are sort of the 5 areas that we are looking at. But again, we go into our heavy negotiations starting on November 4th. We have an industry that is at a crossroads. The potential for AI to innovate in storytelling and production is vast. It truly is. But the drive to protect human creators must remain very strong. The outcome of the previous and future negotiations will absolutely set key precedents that will impact everything from intellectual property law to labor rights in the entertainment industry. I have kept mine as brief as I possibly can. So that's it for me, Raoul. Happy to answer any questions at any point.
Let me ask you a very quick question, because Union des Artistes in Quebec, I believe, is also preparing for a strike. So it almost looks or sounds like you're a bit coordinated. Is that the case?
So we have this amazing group internationally called FIA, which is the Fédération Internationale des Acteurs. And they actually just met in New Zealand, and ACTRA and SAG-AFTRA and UDA were all present to have those coordinated conversations. So as I said, our bargaining starts November 4th in Montreal, and UDA will be there with us, just as part of the understanding that this affects all of us. The strike that was south of the border is the same things that we're going to be fighting for here, except the technology has had a year to advance. So we have to put the protections in place.
All right, you're done with your 12 minutes now. Okay. All right. Pulling it all together for us for the fourth intervention is Abby Gilbert, who's co-director of the Institute for the Future of Work in London, England, I believe. And so she will share some of her observations with us.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Thank you to Cassie for inviting me, and also Raoul for having me contribute to this session. So as mentioned, I come from an organisation called the Institute for the Future of Work, which is based in the UK. We are a research and development institute. So we were formed following a kind of parliamentary inquiry into what new technology meant for the future of work. And we bring together kind of academics from across economics, technology, law, philosophy to think about the consequences of AI in the future. And the reason I give a little bit of an introduction as to who we are is because we are both academic and then also instrumental. So we try and make change in practical ways, be that through the development of policy and regulation, or through the creation of kind of tools and systems of intervention, or even heuristics and kinds of ideational interventions, which I'll mention as well. So I think those three contributions were absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to dig in to some of the points with specific speakers later. But I think starting and maybe going backwards with the contribution from Alistair, there's some really interesting avenues to think about how we could develop a broader base and different coalitions to kind of mobilize around resistance in relation to some of the kind of phenomenon that he's talking about. So I think that creative work has been a kind of canary in the mine for a new kind of acceleration in the kind of disruption that we're seeing as a result of AI. Obviously, the kind of protections that are afforded to some workers, some very few workers in this specific industry by moral rights, copyrights, intellectual property rights. I'm sorry, I can only speak to a kind of UK legal environment in that context. Are protections over the product of one's labour, kind of work methods, knowledge of work, methods of work that's now enabling machines to replace and substitute people in these particular contexts. And there's something also specific about those kind of methods of work and outputs of work that also could lead to a kind of industry agreement to protect those sectors. In that, if you come across the phrasing of enshittification, which is talking about the fact that as there's an increased production of outputs of generative AI on the internet, this could eventually lead to a kind of collapse of the generative AI models that rely on scraped internet materials. So there's a kind of, I suppose, a slight motivation there for industry to also participate in at least the kind of watermarking of these kind of outputs. But thinking about that broad periphery and how this relates to other kind of stakeholders, this kind of encodification of work methods, as many in the room will be aware, has been a long-standing ambition of those designing and developing these systems in practice. And this is also the potential source of building a broader periphery, using the kind of swell that's coming around the kind of creative industries to talk about this broader encodification of work methods. And how that industrial data might be used to fundamentally accelerate some of the polarizations of economic power that are happening now and across the economy. So this kind of broad periphery is both geographic and sectoral. It's more than just the creative industries that are seeing this. So some work that we did some years ago looked at the introduction of connected worker platforms across a series of kind of embodied workplace contexts. So places, non-service workers, essentially. Obviously, many people in this room are probably working with, Microsoft Teams, other tools that could be potentially using the methods of our labour on a daily basis to think about ways to substitute us. But these connected worker platforms were targeting workers who have to go to a place to work. So a lot of the kind of essential workers through the COVID period. And what we found these platforms were doing was finding various ways to encode work methods, either by eliciting an explicit explanation of it from the worker or through really extensive new forms of data aggregation to try and devise what those methods were. And with LLMs, some of what was more imagined about the potential of those technologies is being consolidated as language processing is allowing that to happen in practice. So the problem is that firms don't really have an understanding of what about the data that's collected by these systems when they introduce them in their workplaces is proprietarial data for them or significant to them. And therefore, there's kind of a threat both to workers and also to the firms themselves of the adoption of these systems, which means that that broad coalition of thinking more critically about how the data collected by these systems is used could actually also potentially extend to firms in thinking more critically about the adoption of these tools in practice. So I suppose this kind of industrial data is one point that I think came out for me strongly from the presentations on how significant that is in the context of the majority of firms adopting rather than developing these tools themselves. And it also reflects some of the points that Nathalie made regarding the tendency for the need for, I suppose, a recognition of the fact that these systems are developmental, and when they're adopted, the nature of disruption that's happening at that time is not necessarily going to be kind of the continuation of what the impacts on workers are because of the developmental nature of these systems. And that's obviously not being fully reflected in inquiries and kind of studies in neoclassical journals and investigations that are happening at the moment. For instance, the recent Brynjolfsson paper on the kind of call center workers and Gen AI was concluded that for high skilled workers, they'd see no impact, whereas for the low skilled workers, there'd be this kind of upskilling. So the kind of tendency for a bias towards a positive reading of what will happen. But of course, if you look at the kind of that application in context, it's likely that those higher skilled workers in their own choices of acceptance or rejection of the recommendations would be further training the system and therefore contributing in essence to also their eventual substitution. So we think that there's a requirement in order to kind of address these challenges, but also to get to this kind of balancing of the opportunities and risks that Vanessa talked about in her presentation and anticipating impacts before they happen in practice. Both to have new kind of idea-based heuristics about what automation is, and also new kind of, I suppose, rule regimes that can help us to negotiate that in practice. And we're kind of fortunate in the UK, as much as we're unfortunate, that the government has taken a rather laissez-faire approach so far. There's been a huge amount of conversation about AI governance in the UK. It's got the most kind of cited documents and publications, but there hasn't been yet any kind of sedimented, strong or firm regulatory approach which creates some space for this and for our kind of strategic contributions to that conversation in the UK context. So coming to this kind of this key question around our ideas of what automation are, and also returning to my first point that as a research and development institute, we're sometimes allowed to make intellectual compromises in order to achieve change. That we've been studying the kind of the varied discourses and narratives about what automation is in practice, and find that, and also the way that kind of union struggles and negotiations over technology adoption play out, and think that there is a need for a heuristic of different automation archetypes, which can present where value is being produced and also where value is being extracted according to the way that a particular technology is designed, developed and deployed. So I suppose a contribution that we've made in this space through initially an academic style paper for the PISA Readers Review, which is called Reframing Automation, but we're now turning this into a set of different practical tools, is a heuristic that talks about different automation archetypes. So thinking about high discretion augmentation. It is possible for technology to give workers more power and control over how they work, but it depends on this design, development and deployment kind of choices. Low discretion augmentation, where it might be that the key decision-making aspects of work have been substituted. This delimits a worker's choice environment. It may therefore also be a road to decreasing wages, decreasing compensation, decreasing bargaining power. The intensification of work, as obviously all here will be familiar with, whether or not that is consciously designed by an algorithmic system through task scheduling, or be that incidental through the course of adoption and kind of role design considerations. Thinking about matching as a technological capability that is increasingly used not only in the hiring process, but also within work, not only in the gig economy, but also within standard and professionalized sectors. Allowing for kind of the removal of standardized employment protections as the avenue for value capture there, and telepresence. So obviously surveillance is a major kind of discourse that we hear about, but thinking about the ways in which technology is allowing for labour to be disembodied from the original location that it was kind of conducted in, and how this could lead to different forms of offshoring, which is a particular risk, we think, in parts of the UK health service in professionalised roles as a result of the adoption of these new systems. So this kind of ideational heuristic serves two purposes. Firstly, we think it can be useful in bargaining around the different types of automation that are happening in practice. All of these can come from a single systems adoption, but paying more attention to who is receiving each of those, who is going to be subject to each of those different types of automation, and also asking the employer to be explicit about where they see new forms of value capture coming from as a result of this system, which is also important given that in the majority of adoptions, productivity benefits aren't actually secured because of the lack of engagement with workers, but also because of a failed consideration of really where that value will come from. But then also we're seeking to think about this kind of, I suppose, up the innovation ecosystem and supply chain to also think about how these different types of automation, where value is being contributed by workers relative to a technology in practice, should be used to shape kind of investment choices in different types of technology. What is the innovation ecosystem that we're producing, and who is it benefiting? Both be that the worker, be that the firm, and then also thinking about those third-party providers as someone that's commonly extracting the most kind of value from the implementation of these systems in practice. There's lots more to say about the fascinating contributions by Nathalie, and I think that maybe if we find time and a translation medium that we can get through, it would be great to dig into some of the articles that you've proposed.
So we do actually have substantive time, I would say, half an hour but we also want to throw it open, obviously, to our folks here in the room, pour que vous puissiez poser vos questions. Il faut qu'un micro qui fonctionne, on verra lequel, se promène jusqu'à chez vous pour que la traduction puisse être effectuée. Et pour que ChatGPT vous comprenne. Non, c'est pas vrai. Voilà, donc, qui veut se lancer dans l'eau froide avec la première question? Anybody who would like to? Vincent?
Bonjour à tous, Vincent Pasquier, je suis de HEC Montréal, donc un local de l'État, malgré l'accent, vous pouvez laisser penser que ce n'est pas le cas. Mais de toutes ces présentations, un élément qui ressort de manière assez évidente, c'est que pour que l'IA transforme le travail pour le meilleur, il faut que les salariés soient impliqués relativement le plus en amont possible dans la transformation technologique. Et la question que j'avais à vous poser, à vous quatre, c'est comment s'assurer que les travailleurs aient une voix le plus tôt possible dans le processus de transformation technologique. Par rapport à l'intervention de Vanessa, est-ce que la loi allemande est suffisante actuellement pour s'assurer que les salariés ont effectivement une voix au chapitre dans la transformation technologique? Alistair, comment vous envisagez de vous assurer que votre syndicat pourra parler de manière continue avec les employeurs pendant les 4 ans ou 5 ans que durera votre convention collective de l'IA? Et puis Nathalie, à vous quatre, comment vous allez forcer le dialogue social sur la technologie pour vous assurer que la voix des travailleurs soit entendue au bon moment auprès des employeurs?
So I'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll give the panelists a chance. So if anybody else wants to. And while the mic is navigating its way, Vanessa and Alistair, did you get a good translation of the question that you got in French?
It was a very quiet translation. I think we got some of it.
Essentially, it was about whether you feel like the bargaining leverage that you have and the institutions that are available to you are sufficient so that you can have that dialogue. So in the German context, the Betriebsverfassungsgesetz, and in the context of ACTRA, for example, the fact that you have bargaining rounds only every so and so many years, and then in the meantime, do you still have dialogue with the producers about these issues? So I'm very quickly doing my Gregor Murray translation.
Vanessa, do you want to go first?
Non, je peux Gregor Murrayser en continuer.
J'ai été frappé par la remarque d'Alistair lorsqu'il nous a dit qu'est-ce qui serait important, et c'est le public. Hein, c'est ce qui est la limite de l'action syndicale, c'est le public. Et je pense à ça. Moi, je ne suis pas tombé dans la potion magique de l'IA quand j'étais jeune. Je suis très j'applique la sobriété numérique. Je ne suis pas sur Facebook, mais quand je regarde la nouvelle génération, tu leur dis, oh, ils vont voler vos données, puis ils me disent, non, 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 c'est pas grave. Puis je trouve que le point d'Alistair est particulièrement important et je me demande comment on peut sensibiliser, comment les syndicats et l'ensemble de la population peuvent sensibiliser la population, et notamment, excuse, je fais mon vieux, les jeunes, à faire attention et à être sobre dans l'utilisation de l'IA parce que ce n'est pas le cas en ce moment. Et je pense que ça, c'est un danger qu'Alistair a soulevé. Et je pense que Nathalie nous parlait également d'une des travailleuses qui n'était pas sensible à l'idée qu'elle est en train, en fait, de faire disparaître sa propre job. Je trouve qu'il y a vraiment un enjeu important ici de sensibilisation, mais de changer la narrative.
So without translating the whole "okay, boomer" part of the main question here is around how to make sure that the public and the consumers have an eye out for these critical issues and that they don't just jump into the cold water with both feet.
Raoul, can I take that one just quickly, because I'm in a bit of a unique position because I have the power of celebrity. I have the power to leverage people who actually the public sit up and take notice to. And that's really the only advantage I have at the moment. I have the ability for Ryan Reynolds to say, you know, you need to listen to this because it's really important, and I'm not going to appear on screen anymore if AI replaces me. That is one of the advantages that I have. But where I don't have that is in the world of things like commercials, where most audiences try to skip commercials. Nobody wants to watch a commercial, so they don't really care about stuff like that. But I think what we try to do is when we talk to politicians specifically, we talk to them about how it's going to impact them. And that's really what it comes down to. I think the gentleman said that he wasn't on Facebook at all. You don't have to be anymore. You've now just given your voice over the digital airwaves to Zoom. And if there is if this particular Zoom channel is using any AI in the background, they're now using that to train themselves to do your voice better than you can do it in the future. So it really is about humanizing it, about taking it to the individual and making it important for them. I just happen to have the power of celebrity behind what we're trying to do.
And then let's bring it back to our panelists right away. And on the institutional question, so whether you feel like this leverage of the collective bargaining negotiations is sufficient for you to have a dialogue with the producers and the companies.
Thank you, Alistair. I think, it's a very, very broad field. If you have a company with works council and a strong regulation on one hand, and on the other hand, the platform work, where there's no regulation, the people who work there are not protected. And there you almost have no leverage at all. If AI is introduced in a company like Daimler or VW, right? You have really strong unions, and they have strong rules for everything that happens in the company. And then, then you have chance to negotiate, because the law gives you the possibility to say, oh, you're not going to introduce that tool into our company if you do not agree on certain ground rules, right? But on the other hand, and this is also what Alistair does, there is no protection, no legal protection for actors from these topics. And I think that, we unions all together have to bring this up, because there's a massive lobbying from the companies. You have the AI Act in Europe, which is, it's okay to have it, but basically it's a law that, creates rule for companies who want to produce AI and to sell AI products, and the rights for people are not very strong in this law. So we need really, I think that in the United States, the AFL-CIO founded a technology institute, right? And we have to bring these perspectives together, because Alistair, if I would invite you to Germany, the German audience, people would understand the problems, because it's people love AI in their daily use, and they really like the tools. I mean, I myself like it, right? It's very convenient. It makes a lot of stuff easier, but it's a huge communication problem. And I think the leverage for bargaining is pretty low. You only can do it with, you have to build up a lot of public pressure.
Yeah.
In most spaces, because I mean, these companies like Daimler, VW with such strong power balance, you don't find many of them in the world.
Yeah, and we only get to negotiate once every 3 years. And 3 years ago, when we negotiated, AI existed, but we didn't negotiate any language into our agreement 3 years ago. And where it was 3 years ago versus where it is today, versus where it was a year ago when SAG-AFTRA put language in their agreement, is wildly and vastly different. I mean, I think I shared an Instagram link for folks. It's a video of me. It's not anybody famous. But it literally was just to showcase the fact that I can speak Japanese, German, and Hindi, and I can't speak any of those.
Yeah.
But with $16 US, a 5-minute video, 6-minute turnaround time, I can now speak all 3 of those languages, and my lips move properly with all of the words coming out of my mouth. And it's those sorts of manifestations, those real world examples are the only real leverage we have, plus the ongoing work of politicians. But again, that grinds like at a very slow pace. So.
All right. Je vais laisser la chance aussi à Nathalie qui est interpellée et Abby, si elle choisit bien.
Je voudrais d'abord corriger un peu ce que tu as dit, Christian. La membre qui a entraîné l'intelligence artificielle, c'est pas parce qu'elle n'était pas consciente de l'impact, c'est parce qu'elle ne le savait pas. L'employeur l'a trompé. C'est une industrie où elle avait souvent à corriger du sous-titrage fait par un sous-traitant. Donc, elle pensait que c'était un sous-traitant. Puis, un mois plus tard, on lui a présenté le même texte. Là, c'est bizarre, mais bon, c'est quand même mieux fait. Elle a fait les corrections nécessaires. Et quand le texte est revenu une 3e fois, là, elle est allée voir son président de syndicat, puis elle a dit, là, je pense que l'employeur est en train d'entraîner une intelligence artificielle. Mais il était trop tard, tu comprends? C'était déjà parti, la machine. Là où je pense que le public, ce que ACTRA tente de faire avec le public, rejoint un peu ce qu'on tente de faire avec nos membres, c'est qu'on réalise que l'intelligence artificielle, c'est très peu connu la façon dont ça fonctionne réellement. Les membres ont l'impression que c'est de la technologie qu'ils ne pourront pas comprendre. Et en faisant des ateliers il y a quelques semaines, là, on s'est rendu compte que là, ça fait allumer des lumières. Les gens comprennent mieux. Puis là, peut-être que les gens pourraient aussi aller voir leurs députés et dire là, est-ce que vous avez un plan? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait comme société? Parce que c'est vrai qu'éventuellement, il n'y aura plus personne qui va payer d'impôts si, en fait, il va y avoir moins d'impôts. Nous, on voit des baisses de salaire peut-être venir parce que des tâches vont être retirées dans des emplois dont les salaires sont fixés par des plans d'évaluation d'emploi. Donc, il faut être conscient de ça. Puis je pense que les gens, c'est bien d'avoir des vedettes qui en parlent, mais il faudrait aussi sensibiliser les gens au fait que ce n'est pas seulement les emplois des acteurs qui peuvent être touchés, mais aussi les emplois de monsieur, madame, tout le monde dans différents secteurs. Puis, pour ce qui est de conscientiser les jeunes, moi, je trouve que l'aspect environnemental de l'IA devrait être davantage mis de l'avant. Et les syndicats devraient être plus vocaux. Parce que qui est-ce qu'on entend? On entend les industries, les chercheurs, l'entreprise, les chambres de commerce, mais on n'entend pas le monde du travail. Donc, nous, on s'est donné un objectif de tenter de l'être davantage. Dans les prochains mois, on verra si on va y arriver.
Thank you. So I suppose the first of all, maybe address the question at the back, which I took to be, how can workers be engaged more at the end stage? One of the applications that we're using this kind of new heuristic of automation archetypes for is to think about how, when different types of adoption happen, existing legal regimes, at least in the UK context, might kick in terms of the requirements for consultation, which are obviously broadly ignored and overlooked, but how they relate to each of these different types of automation kind of impacts, which is something that's being disconnected from the rest of the AI governance kind of discourse and risk management kind of framing. So thinking, for instance, about Obviously, GDPR is the main framework that people are thinking about in terms of surveillance and telepresence, but also what the health and safety, the powers of the health and safety executive in relation to intensification, kind of regulations around TP in terms of displacement. So I suppose the first part is documenting the ways in which existing regulations and laws are not being sufficiently heeded to improve the adoption of these systems. And then to pick up on a model that we've created, which is very, I think, similar to the one that Nathalie described, working in partnership with the Trades Union Congress in the UK, but also regulators, is a kind of good work algorithmic impact assessment, which is a framework that both embeds this kind of analysis of the kind of different routes to value capture and extraction, avenues towards job redesign and what that looks like in terms of these different automation archetypes within a process that highlights the ways in which a system may present risks to a firm of breaches with different types of labour law, but also, I suppose, normative principles around good work in that context. And I think that one of the interesting points that Nathalie made in her presentation was around the clauses that have been specifically introduced to ensure that there is a revised consultation when there are changes to the nature of probably the data processing, the data use, maybe the data storage, as well as those kind of localized impacts. But from the UK context, and I imagine this might translate, the challenges around this relate to the kind of complexity of the ecosystem of providers behind any third-party supplier. So I think something that we see some hope in also exposing the ways in which these kinds of clauses can function is by partnering with unions through a sandbox, which is a kind of environment that we built to apply these best practice governance frameworks like good work and algorithmic impact assessment, see how firms are abiding by existing obligations that relate to this kind of idealized process, but also how firms are meaningfully able to access that kind of information themselves, which again comes back to this kind of potential coalition with firms and employers because of the market concentration factors that relate to this. So coming back to, I mean, the kind of industrial data point, China's defined industrial data rather than personal data as the kind of fifth pillar of its economic development, this recognition that this is important. I suppose, yeah, there's something to kind of look to there. And again, with firms seeing that both the methods of how work is done in their organization are now being stored elsewhere. Those same third-party providers are also offering to match you with workers who now are not also your employees. There's such a fundamental transformation of what the firm even is as a result of these technologies. Again, I think processes that highlight that to businesses as another potential, them being brought on side, I think can also be useful in this if those risks are highlighted. And then my last comment would just be asked to Alistair as to whether or not he might use some of this celebrity power to make that case about industrial data across the rest of the economy, whether or not that could be mobilizing a new conversation beyond just the personal individualized rights kind of discourse that's been linked and underpins personal data protections, which are more times.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely have champions within our union that are very, very concerned about not only about the work that is on screen, but about the personal protections and the climate conversations as well. So I think, using that celebrity in any way, shape, or form that we can is going to be vital to ensure that the conversation is heard and paid attention to.
All right, second round of questions. There's somebody already there, and then there's two questions coming up there. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know I missed some, so I have one thing, but I saw a survey recently about the use of AI within firms and how it might be a little bit overstated, especially among smaller firms. So it may not be, I mean, it could just be a waiting game, maybe coming, right? But I wonder what the implications are of that for workers, unions, and maybe them getting the foot in the door, reading the government to, shape how that technology is actually implemented. And if there's a chance that some smaller firms never will want to adopt these technologies, not saying they won't, but some people just want maybe they do, because that the detriment to competitive advantage may fall by the wayside. But I'm wondering, we usually focus on the companies, larger ones, which likely that are adopting these technologies. What about small ones that might not be there yet?
Those were really great presentations. And I had a question, I think for all of the speakers, but I particularly felt like you were illustrating Abby some of these different areas. I think you had a nice classification for thinking about how you think about the different use and applications of AI and their impacts. And I was thinking about this also as Vanessa was presenting about Germany, because I've done a lot of research in Germany on negotiations over AI in different contexts. And most recently, talking to works counselors at places like Deutsche Telekom and Siemens in Germany, I've heard that works councils have been pretty good at getting agreements on the use of AI for surveillance and algorithmic management, using Works Constitution Act and their rights on control over performance and behavior in those areas. And the AI Act also further reinforces and focuses on those kinds of issues and applications of AI, where they feel like they don't have as many tools or as much control is over these kind of more labor replacing impacts of AI, or the impact on the restructuring of work, and also the displacement or the way that jobs are being outsourced. So talking to, for example, Deutsche Telekom works counselors, they said, great, we have all these works agreements, all these collective agreements that address different aspects of how the technologies are used in surveillance in the workplace and on different kinds of management practices. But now the company is using translation to move all of the business process outsourcing work, all the business processes, to India and Africa. And there are many other cases in which thousands of jobs are now being cut in call centers, and the ability to translate some of the rights and tools to those contexts is much more challenging. So I guess my question is how Vanessa at IG Metall, or maybe more generally in everybody's work and research, you're thinking about the relationship between these two areas, and how unions or policy can maybe also move more to thinking about the displacement effects or the job replacement effects, and giving unions more tools to negotiate in that area.
My question was about in the U.S., there are a handful of unions that are trying to start to become involved in mitigating impacts of technology by participating in the design and development of technological applications, AI applications. In some cases, it means that they have also started to work with other stakeholders, like the vendors and developers themselves. And I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel has experience or thoughts with that approach.
Thank you so much. It's a question about enforcement. Abby made the comment that we can lean on the laws and legislation that are already there. Like, we're coming up with new ideas for language. To my QB colleague, AFPC, PSAC, using collective agreement language that currently exists, leaning on it to leverage it. Do we see enforcement or grievance successes on this new topic, but with the old language?
All right, maybe we can go to our friends online first. I think Vanessa, you got a couple of very specific questions. Maybe you go first.
Well, the example of telecom and outsourcing, I mean, there's been outsourcing since we have computers in the industry. And they're one wave after the other. It's not specifically connected to AI. And our answer to this is actually that's our position, because we want to further develop the Works Constitution Act and say we need, actually it's a Mitbestimmungsgesetz, we need to have a say in managerial decisions, because that's what managers decide. Managers look at the costs and say, oh, we can get this process done cheaper in India or elsewhere. I mean, it's good for people in India to have work too. So this, and they're doing a pretty good job. But the math is often wrong, because they outsource the process, the quality goes down. And in many examples, they take it back after a couple of years. So it's actually a huge loss for everybody. And so this is one of our demands, that we say we want to have a say in these managerial decisions. And we want to try the Works Constitution Act. But this is a very, very strong demand, and there's a lot of resistance. And we do have in the steel industry and even at VW, we have a little better legislation so that, you know, at VW, the Works Council members have a say and plants cannot be closed without the Works Council. So, and, you know, we need more rights into this direction. And, but all together, I mean, and I think, especially when I look at Siemens, there would be more possibilities, but in Siemens, you don't have a strong union density. And this is what I have. I mean, that's actually my strongest message is we have to get more people into the unions, because in the end of the day, it's not about arguments. It's not about rights, because the difference between a right that is written on a paper and that it becomes real for the workers is that the answer is unionizing, you know, and I see this in many examples. I have seen an example at an auto plant, you know, where by the sheer power of union members and the Works Council say, look, we're not going to go with this. Either you're going to let us test the software, whether it's discriminating or not, or we're just going to, and it's not because of, you know, legal arguments, because they're going to need them in another situation, and then they have the power to get it done. And I think that's actually, I mean, we need this kind of pressure, because I think that conflict is lost. AI is everywhere. And I mean, it's not going to stay everywhere, because they're going to make mistakes. Some tools are not going to work, or they're going to see the process, you know, is better with human work. You also have in automation, you have, I mean, Toyota brought back the welders to the auto production, because they said the process is not innovative if we don't have people in the process anymore, right? So it's, but I mean, but it's lost. It's there and it's going to grow, and the people are going to make mistakes, and then some things are going to work out. I don't see a chance that we're going back. So we really have to throw everything in creating good regulations. And the points that Alistair said before, for the people of the workplace, it's important to know what is happening with them. I mean, information, transparency, that's a major topic for everybody who has in a workplace connections with AI.
All right. I want to give the chance to our other panelists to answer some of the questions as well. Maybe Alistair, you want to go next?
Sure. I talk from such a niche place. But what I do think we all know is that we can't put this toothpaste back into the tube. We are not going to be able to ever say no AI. That's just not happening. So it's how do we work within it? How do we work with it? How do we control it? And how do we ensure that there are guardrails in place that will protect workers? I think the gentleman asked a question about using existing language that's in current collective agreements to argue against new technologies. And while always a challenge, I'm always up for a good challenge. And so we have absolutely used the human aspect of definitions in our contracts, right? When we talk about performers, it is very much with a human in mind. And therefore, when you introduce a non-human into a collective agreement, that is not actually that is actually a breach of the collective agreement. So we have relied on that language with some success to date, but it's not going to hold water for much longer. So to ensure that, you know, it does require language change, as much as I would love to be able to just rely on the old language that's there, it will require an update.
So about a minute and a half each. Abby, maybe first, and then Nathalie, tu auras le mot de la fin.
Sure. So I think in response to your question, in the UK context at least, there's been this sort of evolution of the debate. It started with, in regulatory terms, with data, and then it moved to automated decision making. And now obviously there's Gen AI, but then actually it seems like really the foundational question was still what we started with in data, and there might be a return to that now. The government's just published a new smart data bill. And then equally that was mirrored with the kind of move from displacement and resisting the dominance of the displacement discourse, which was actually part of the reason that we were founded, was to go beyond that as the only conversation, that plus upskilling in the kind of neoclassical arena, to thinking about job quality. But then maybe there's that need for a return to a focus on displacement now that we found in the context of UK unions, that actually the focus of their considerations was displacement rather than these other effects. So it's kind of we're in a slightly different position. I think on the question around, I'm interpreting this as best I understood it, around whether or not it's useful to rely on existing leavers, highlight their inadequacy, or think about, make the case for new interventions. We are, I suppose, again, to come back to this point about fragmentation, when you look at Europe, there's a number of different regimes that are all speaking to management of different types of risks and opportunities, and principally risks relating to the deployment of AI at work, with the Platform Worker Directive, or different regimes that are coming at this from different angles. But that fragmentation is also kind of limiting of meaningful accountability in some ways for looking across all of the dimensions of good work when something's been rolled out. So for us, we do want a new legal requirement for good work algorithmic impact assessment in the UK, and we've worked with parliamentarians to see that tabled in probing amendments, what that legal requirement would look like. And also there's a requirement in the TUC's proposed AI bill for something like this. But then we're also just mapping where existing obligations sit in relation to that architecture to kind of layer it, and I suppose also provide a kind of a further case for this kind of the use of a process like this as best governance if we don't succeed in getting something like this in law. So that's the strategy.
Sur la potentielle bulle de l'IA qui a été mentionnée, je pense que oui, c'est possible. On ne connaît pas la trajectoire exacte, mais comme on dit, il faut espérer pour le mieux et se préparer pour le pire. Donc, je pense que c'est bien d'avoir une approche qui évite les écueils, dans le fond. Surtout que l'année dernière, on était en 2023, 10 mois après l'arrivée de ChatGPT, le ministre Champagne disait dans une conférence, dans 10 ans, les entreprises qui n'ont pas adopté l'IA ne seront plus en affaires. Donc, il y a aussi un incitatif des gouvernements à aller de l'avant. Et par rapport aux équipementiers puis aux vendeurs là, qui produisent des systèmes d'IA, on a juste à voir Microsoft cette semaine qui a annoncé un nouveau produit qui va permettre à des entreprises d'avoir des agents IA ou à des individus de se créer un agent IA. Mais ça rend ça encore plus facile d'approche pour les petites entreprises. Donc, je pense que petites entreprises ou grandes entreprises, elles vont regarder quelles sont les possibilités. Et des solutions comme celle de Microsoft vont rendre ça encore plus attrayant et accessible pour les petites entreprises, ce que je n'aurais pas pensé l'année dernière. Donc, ça avance aussi très vite. Et pour ce qui est des clauses actuelles, des conventions collectives, oui, je pense qu'on peut les mettre en action. Je pense, entre autres, nous, on a souvent des clauses anti-sous-traitance. Donc, dans ces clauses-là, quand elles sont déjà très fortes, ça peut permettre justement de mettre en échec l'utilisation d'une firme en sous-traitance pour utiliser un système d'IA, ce qui fait que l'entreprise a à développer son propre système. Donc, il y a des clauses comme ça, oui, qui peuvent aider. Et il y a aussi, dans la législation, là, on n'avait pas le temps de parler de tout, mais il y a différentes dispositions législatives qui peuvent être utilisées. Je suis d'accord avec Abby là, dès maintenant.
Many thanks. I usually have to explain my sort of subtractive bilingualism to my students and say, well, words may come out of my mouth in English or French. I'm thinking about Alistair here with his, but if I'm starting to speak Russian, then call 911, I'm having a seizure. Now I need to say, if I start speaking Russian, check whether I might have been replaced by a hologram, right? I've been outsourced. Anyhow, quelques remerciements à Julie Garneau qui est en ligne et à Christian parce que ce sont des co-organisateurs de la séance aujourd'hui. Remerciements à l'Obvia d'avoir soutenu, financé cet axe de recherche et many thanks to our participants. So online, Alistair, Vanessa, many thanks. Nathalie, Abby, ici dans la salle, merci beaucoup. Merci à vous pour vos questions et bon café.